Trafalgar Law hears voices, the voices of things to be precise. But does he hear the voice of all things? Because some things is not enough. I mean, even I can hear the voice of some things. So as crazy as this idea may sound, here's why fans are now certain that Law can hear the voice of all things. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I recently got my law degree, which is significantly less impressive than it sounds because it just means that I've spent a lot of time studying one particular fictional pirate. But some controversial word statements in recent manga chapters have ignited a rather delicious possibility that Trafalgar Law may be able to use the voice of all things. And as you all know, I'm quite skeptical when it comes to wacky ideas like this. So for the sake of science, we have implanted a special listening device in Law's brain thing that will allow us to hear the voices that he's hearing. So let's tune in and see what he's listening to right now.
It's not bread if it's toast. Give it a try.
Truly chilling, much like Bread Lee Toasted Breads and Not So Grand Line Review, each of whom ascended into toasthood by hitting the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, resulting in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you'd like to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. Now, the entire reason why this discussion has become so prominent is due to a single panel in chapter 1043, which I guess means a spoiler warning for anime only watchers. In fact, this video is probably going to be full of spoilers actually. But in that chapter, Law says the following. Straw Hat's voice has disappeared. Curious. Yes, very curious. Because Law is one of two characters to say this in the chapter. The other being our peachily named Momonosuke, who brings confusing new meaning to the term dragon fruit. But he says, I do not hear Luffy's voice anymore, which is quite conflicting because Momonosuke is not a haki user, and Law, to the best of our knowledge, is not a voice user. So why are they using the same terminology to describe different abilities? Well, interestingly enough, this is not the first time that Momonosuke and Law have been directly juxtaposed in a voice-related incident. And to illustrate the thing it is that I just said, in chapter 817, Momo does his best Spider-Man impression by stating, Mr. Kinemon, I don't feel so good, but more accurately stating that the closer he gets to the whale, which was actually a tree in the shape of a whale, but the closer he gets to that whale, the louder the voice he hears. Dialogue that is rather suspiciously accompanied by a close-up of one Trafalgar, who is listening almost creepily intensely and contributing nothing of value to the discussion except for an ellipsis. I don't know why Law was chosen as the close-up for this moment. There are like 20 characters in the group at this point, and if Law isn't a voice user, then any one of them would have been equally as appropriate. But in hindsight, this does at least make a minimum hourly wage of sense, because the voice that Momo is hearing is not Zunesha. That comes much later, when Jack arrives to collect another one of his devastating series defeats. And when Zunesha does start talking, Momo even says that this is the loudest voice he's heard yet, meaning that the voice he was hearing before was that of the road poneglyph, which is an established trait of voice users. Roger, for example, was able to hear the voices of these chunks of info cubes, even if he was unable to actually read them. And in this panel, that's precisely what Law could be eavesdropping in on as well. Now, speaking of eavesdropping, I wonder what Trafalgar Law is hearing right now.
Give Robin your will of deed.
Okay, a particularly hornsome voice there. But to be fair, Law did end up doing just that. He did reveal his will of deed to Robin, in private of course, and resolved to discover the mystery behind this whole fate business. Which brings us back to poneglyphs, because on Onigashima, Law made a very helpful discovery. In chapter 996, he startlingly casually stumbles upon a poneglyph in Kaido's mansion, in a very out-of-the-way location as well, right down the bottom in the second basement floor. Probably the most irrelevant and out-of-the-way location on the entire island, where the action was decidedly not happening. And yet Law decided to take this detour as a result of what? A whim? Or did he hear the voice of this poneglyph in the same way that he may have heard the voice of the road poneglyph on Zou? Now, there is a potential counter-explanation that doesn't involve either head voices or stupid luck, and that is Law's series-breaking abilities with the Ope Ope no Mi. When Law constructs a room, he theoretically becomes aware of everyone and, more importantly, everything within said room. So if he made a big enough room, or even a series of like scouting rooms, it's conceivable that this discovery was much less random in nature. At the same time though, I'm currently looking at this from far too realistic of a perspective. There is a simpler answer, which is that One Piece is a story, and Oda needed this poneglyph found for the sake of future developments. And Law was a good candidate to do so because he wasn't particularly busy, whilst Luffy, Sword Luffy, Metal Luffy, and of course Knife Luffy were making a big F-off mess upstairs. But at the very least, it's quite the convenient coincidence, and at this stage you could make the argument that Law Law is using the voice of all things, but that is not all. Because if we take a step back to the Dressrosa days in chapter 781, Law quite literally speaks to Luffy via a mechanism that is not his mouth and appears to be a brand of telepathy, depicted as being very similar to how Zunisha spoke to Momonosuke, or even how Luffy spoke to Momonosuke. With this evidence, Law would be 100% confirmed as a voice user, if not for one thing, which is, again, Law's series-breaking powers. When this communication occurred, both Luffy and Law were in a giant room, and when we're in a room, anything that Oda wants to happen can happen. Weird Haki interactions aside, Law is essentially a god in these spaces, and so I have to be very skeptical about anything that goes on in a room. And in general, it's really difficult to analyze a man who can do absolutely anything under the right circumstances. And speaking of, I wonder what he's doing right now.
Pet the polar bear, for it is a good bear.
Law hearing what I suspect is Beppo's voice there, and I fully agree, he is a good boy and deserves pets. But let's make this discussion endlessly more confusing though. The basis for this idea has to do with Momo and Law using the term voice, which out of context seems like a really clear indicator that they are using the same ability. The problem is, this is not the first time that observation Haki has been conflated with the voice of all things, and this dates all the way back to Skypiea. In chapter number a long time ago, Isa described her mantra phenomenon as, "I've never been so afraid in my life. So many voices are fading away." And then we cut to chapter number a long time ago, but not quite as long ago. We found Kobe experiencing the Isa effect when he said, "The voices in my head, they're disappearing one by one." And in Kobe's case, this was later confirmed to be an awakening of Haki. Now, to be fair, this determination was made by Dr. Fishbonen, a man who is quite literally what he eats. So take his words with the same salt found in the sea where that fish in his mouth used to reside. And again, it's another one of those things where in world this is pretty easy to explain, because the voice of all things is a hidden ability. You can't just find it by looking for it. It's not there. So if Fishbonen, whose official job description is some dude from the Marines, if he hears Kobe's symptoms, he's just going to assign it to Haki because, I guess it sounds similar enough. Again though, One Piece is a story, and Fishbonen is not a living, breathing individual. He is speaking with the voice of Eiichiro Oda in order to convey information to the audience. But the thing is, at this stage, I don't entirely have a grasp on why Oda would deliberately conflate these two powers. It's confusing, as demonstrated by my visible confusion, particularly because other words are available and have been used in the past. Law could have simply stated, "Straw Hat's presence has disappeared," or "I can't sense Luffy anymore," or "I am unable to detect Mugiwara Ya." Granted, all of those are English alternatives, but I have it on good authority that the Japanese language also contains synonyms. But in both languages, we are fixating on the word voice. But maybe Law's personal voices will provide some insight into this matter.
Put Chopper on your head.
I definitely agree with that one. I mean, peak Trafalgar Law was when he was wearing his chopper hat, which is actually 3 hats in one. Law had his basic polar cap with a reindeer on top of that, and the reindeer himself was wearing a hat, thus making a triple hat. To address another thing now, it should also be said that Luffy has a particularly special voice. During Onigashima, he has displayed the ability to not only listen, but also speak using the voice of all things, which he used to attract the Heart Pirates in order to prevent himself from doing a bit of that there death. So one could potentially conjure the idea that Luffy's voice had been broadcasting and Law was tuning into his favorite station, Luffy FM, which only ever has one song entitled "Meat, Meat, Meat, Pirate King, More Meat." But surely everyone else would have been hearing it as well, because you don't need to be anything special to hear it, which was demonstrated when Creepy Mask Guy heard Luffy's voice, and no one has ever told him that he's special, not even his mother. In fact, especially not his mother. That's why he wears the happy mask to hide his crippling depression. I guess he couldn't be Joy Boy either. But the Luffy voice projection idea, look, it just doesn't hold up too well in my mind brain, and we're left in a situation that really could go either way. Law is the kind of man who I would best describe as a shoe, because he is quite the sneaker. Law does not willingly divulge information, not even to his allies. In fact, right now, the only person on the crew who even knows about his infamous D is Robin, and maybe he wouldn't have even told her that much if he didn't suspect that she might be able to give him some D-related favors in return. By which I mean information and nothing else. But nothing else is exactly what Law got from her anyway. Sadly, there's also no solid link we can derive from existing voice wielders that we can use to eliminate Law. Right now, it's Luffy and Roger who can be assigned with all of the main character powers we want, as well as Kozuki Oden and his Peach spawn Momonosuke, which doesn't do a whole lot except clarify that the voice of all things is not D-Clan exclusive. In world, it seems like the voice of all things is a pure gift of fate, because it is possessed by the people who need to possess it. And in terms of a meta-narrative, it's exactly the same. This ability is given to the characters who need it for story reasons. And also, there's no reason why Law should be exempt from either of those categories. As a D-man, he is already subject to the forces of fate. And as a character who Oda just enjoys a lot more than he ever anticipated, we could certainly just keep stacking powers on top of this OP ability pack mule until the end of the series. I mean, he's already ridiculous, so what's another power at this stage? I guess he is missing Conqueror's Haki, which even Eustace Kid has, so yeah, we may as well give Law something else, and have some voices. And now let us once again listen to the very wise words within Law's chaotic head.
Omelette du fromage?
So the voices are now speaking to Law in French, which is a very foreboding omen, as his real name Waterloo is of course a reference to Waterloo, where history's most famous Frenchman Napoleon did a bit of a lose, after which point he spent his final days in a quote, damp, mold-infested, wretched habitation until he died without so much as a single omelette du fromage by his side. So he is hoping that Law will end his time in One Piece in a slightly more dignified manner. And here's hoping you click this next video, because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there. Done!